Can we talk about Transformers EarthSpark? Our new next Transformers show aired this Friday. It's on. They're doing it like through both Paramount Plus and Nickelodeon. So if you have a Paramount Plus account, you can watch it now, and then I guess it will air later on Nickelodeon. I watched it on Paramount Plus, so I'm not exactly sure how the Nickelodeon airing is working, but it came out on Friday, and of course, naturally, I watched the whole thing the day that it came out, and it's really good. And this is really exciting for me because, like, honestly, I feel like in terms of the Transformers media that we've had over the past like several years, there hasn't really, at least in my opinion, been a good Transformers show since like Transformers Prime ended, and that was almost a decade ago. I think it ended in 2013, so we're getting there. Like, RID 2015 was okay. It did have this huge problem of like notionally being a Prime sequel and just being much worse than Prime, so a lot of people don't like it for that reason, but I think even on its own merit, it's kind of a rough show. And then, you know, we've had like, what else? So, I mean, the Prime Wars trilogy, obviously the Machinima one was garbage. The Netflix show was better than the Prime Wars trilogy, but still not very good. And Cyberverse, granted, a lot of people really like Cyberverse. I don't. I really don't think Cyberverse is very good. That's just my opinion. And then like BotBots. BotBots was great, I think. That was a great show. But it was like not your typical sort of Transformers show. It was really kind of only tangentially related to Transformers. So in my mind, we haven't really gotten a good Transformers show proper since like 2013 when Prime ended. And it was just such a breath of fresh air to get a show that feels like it takes itself just seriously enough, but without taking itself too seriously. Like, we've got shows like Cyberverse and RID 2015, which I feel like just don't take themselves seriously at all. Like, they're not really trying to tell stories. Like Cyberverse, and maybe this is what people like about it, this is what makes it kind of hard for me to latch onto it, is that it's kind of just a non-stop goof fest, and the jokes I don't think are like that funny. So it's like, it's not really like a well-told narrative. Like, if you read a Wikipedia article about the actual events that happen in Transformers Cyberverse, it would make it seem like it was a more interesting show than the actual show itself, because like the whole show feels like a bullet-pointed list of like things that happen rather than an actual story with character development. And like, you know, that's kind of to an extent how G1 was, so I guess that's maybe why a lot of people like Cyberverse. But ultimately, like, they weren't really trying to tell a compelling narrative. It was just like, oh, these are a bunch of gags, a lot of Easter eggs, which is, you know, a lot of people appreciate the Easter eggs, myself included, but it didn't really have like a lot there to really bite into from a narrative standpoint. And RID 2015, I feel like was also kind of that way. And then on the inverse side of that, we have the issue of the Netflix War for Cybertron trilogy, which I think took itself way too seriously. It's like, oh, this one is for adults, so we're gonna have there be so many on-screen deaths and cursing, but like ignoring the fact that like what adults like about media compared to children's media is like in-depth narrative, because it didn't have one. Yeah, so basically, this is a roundabout way of saying I feel like the EarthSpark show gets the tone just right, where it's for kids, so it's fun and goofy, but it actually tells stories and takes its characters seriously. Like, you know, there's plenty of kids shows with like good narratives that like can have its fun, have its goofs, but then also gets real sometimes. Whereas I don't feel like Cyberverse ever got real. I don't think RID 2015 ever got real. And the Prime Wars not the Prime Wars, we all know why the Prime Wars trilogy is bad, but the Netflix series, it's like sort of neglecting the fact that it's a show that is about trucks that turn into robots, which is an inherently goofy concept. So like, you can tell good serious stories like you do in Prime, or like you do in Animated, or like you do in Beast Wars, but you can't get rid of the kind of like, you know, the fun out of it. Like, the Netflix series just like sucked all the fun out of it, and not even for the sake of a good in-depth narrative, because I don't think it really had that either. So, and this one, I feel like it takes itself seriously in terms of the characters having like believable motivations, and it also can have fun, where the fun is believable and doesn't feel out of place. And I really liked that about it in comparison to the last several series from the Transformers franchise. So tone, good. The voice acting, really good. Lots of good voice actors. Some different choices than some of the ones we typically see. Like, I will admit, like, it gave me pause when we first started seeing like these lists of the cast, and Optimus Prime is played by Alan Tudyk, which is he's a great actor. Like, you know, I've loved Alan Tudyk ever since Firefly. But you know, he's been in lots of stuff, and he has a pretty significant voice acting career, especially more recently too. Like, he's the Joker in Harley Quinn, and he plays that kind of voice really well. So I was a little bit skeptical when they announced that he was going to be Optimus Prime, just because like he doesn't really have like a primey type voice, and in some of the early trailers, like the lines that they picked out for him kind of made it seem like he was just doing a Peter Cullen impression, which is the thing that I have detested about the more recent versions of Optimus Prime, because they have this guy, I think his name is like Jake Fushi or something, like Fauci, I don't know, but he's been the person playing Optimus Prime in the past few years. He was him in Cyberverse. He was him in the Netflix series. He might have been him for part of the Prime Wars trilogy too. I'm not sure. And they found this guy straight up, like, he was a YouTuber who did impressions of Peter Cullen. And I'm sure he had more to his career than that, but like, it was like this long-running trend of like, oh, we're not wanting to, pay for Peter Cullen because he's a unioned actor, so we're just going to hire someone doing an impression of him who is not with a union, so we can pay him less. And it's like, it's bad for Jake, it's bad for Peter, it's bad for the audience, frankly, because like, if you're doing an impression of another person, it makes it a lot harder to actually act underneath that. So like, he did a very good impression, he was a very talented impressionist, but like, he wasn't doing his own voice. And Optimus Prime does not have to be Peter Cullen, is the thing, is that we had, what's his name, Gary Chalk, who's the voice of Optimus Prime. Well, he did Optimus Prime in the Unicron trilogy for years, and like, it's a completely different voice, and it works. We've had other people do Optimus Primes in the past. It doesn't always have to be Peter Cullen. Obviously, I love Peter Cullen's voice. I think he makes a great Prime when he plays Prime, like Transformers Prime is my favorite version of Optimus Prime, and he's played by Peter Cullen in that one. But my main thing is, if you're not gonna hire Peter Cullen, just do a different voice. And I feel like in EarthSpark, he is doing his own voice, Alan Tudyk is. And that is definitely refreshing, because again, some of those early trailers made it kind of seem like he was doing an impression, which wouldn't be great, but it's definitely a different vibe to Optimus Prime. Like, he's definitely not like the all-knowing kind of like super stoic, always right hero that he was in Transformers Prime. He's definitely a bit more flawed, kind of full of it, honestly. Like, he is not a perfect character. It's like, oh, he's trying to do the right thing, but he makes some compromises. He's kind of playing into the... Anyway, I'll get into it later. But anyway, I think Alan Tudyk does a really good job. Corey McCain, is that his name? The guy who played the Hound in Game of Thrones plays Megatron, which is just it's a really good choice. And then they have, oh gosh, what's his name? Daniel Pudi playing Bumblebee. Good. And then, all the new characters are played by people I, for the most part, haven't heard of before, and they're all fine. They all, they're good voice actors, and it seems like, this is the trend that is breaking, is like in Cyberverse and the Prime Wars trilogy is just like, they put so much effort into hiring people who like weren't with proper unions that it's just like, it's bad for actors in general, and also it means that the voice acting in like shows like Cyberverse just generally wasn't very good in my opinion. And this definitely feels like a breath of fresh air. Like, okay, we're hiring real people to do real voices, giving voice actors their chance to be voice actors rather than, you know, treating it as just kind of like a kiddie thing that doesn't matter. So the voice acting is really good, the acting's really good. The narrative I think is really interesting. I like a lot of the, you know, I'll get into this a little bit later, but I like a lot of the stuff in it. It's definitely, you know, if you're wanting non-stop robot battles all the time, it definitely, as kids, it does do narratives with the kids. I know, end of the world, but I think it's enjoyable, you know? Like, there's like Transformers narratives that rely too heavily on the humans, and I feel like if you're gonna do that, you have to make compelling human characters, and these characters I like the human characters. We've got oh god, what are there? Mo is the little sister, and then what's his name? Gosh, I just watched through all this. Mo and okay, I can only remember one of the kids' names, so I'll skip past that. But they're both really good. I like the older brother is like a pretty compelling character, and the younger sister is a fun character too. Neither of them feel too like gratingly immature. Like they feel like kids, but they don't feel like cartoony kids that are just like insufferable and making nothing but the wrong choices all the time and just getting in everyone's way. Like, it doesn't really feel like that. And I also like that they actually wrote into the narrative a reason for the kids to have to be involved, because like I love Transformers Prime, but one of the things I was always wondering is like if Optimus Prime is really this like all responsible kind of, you know, big father figure who's like this great leader, like he should have just kicked the kids out after like the second time. After the first time that Miko like follows them into the space bridge and then almost gets killed, like that should be kids banned from base forever. And I like the kids in Transformers Prime. I like them as characters, but there's definitely that bit of like that disconnect there, that suspension of disbelief where you're like, okay, well, if he was really as responsible as they're portraying him to be, he should have cut that off a while ago, because like really they almost die almost every single episode. But with these ones, they're like bonded to the two new Cybertronians, so at least they're like, they have a reason to be there, where it's like, oh yeah, we actually need them involved, they're important. And again, like they're not really bringing them into battle or anything, because like, okay, I guess we'll transition into moving to some kind of narrative stuff since I'm talking about the narrative, but like basically the whole premise of the show is these two kids, they kind of accidentally birth these new Cybertronians with some rock that they find in the ground, which it is revealed what it is later. And it's kind of this mystery thing, and they're like bonded to them. So it's like, not only do we have our human kids, but we also kind of have our Cybertronian kids. Well, they call them Terrans because they're made on Earth, but you know, they're the Transformers species, right? And so the plot of the show is basically like, oh, they're kind of have to be kept secret because Optimus Prime and Megatron, they're working together because like the war from the 80s ended ages ago, and they've been working with this kind of shady government organization that they're only really working with as a means to an end. And they realize like, oh, if they find out that these new Cybertronians were born on Earth, then they'll be like test subjects, and you know, they'll want to use them as assets and stuff like that. So they're being held secret. And for reasons that have not yet been explained, Bumblebee is also living in hiding. So Optimus Prime recruits Bumblebee to basically train the new characters and kind of teach them how to be Transformers, and you know, teach them how to exist on the planet and stuff like that. So I feel like it does the Bumblebee as leader thing way better than RID 2015, just because like, you know, that show, like, man, it did this really cringy thing where it's just like trying to show that none of them take him seriously, but he's just like trying to act overly important all the time. So it doesn't really work. Whereas this Bumblebee is like kind of believable as like still sort of kiddish in comparison to like Optimus Prime and Megatron, who are like the big boys, right? But more experienced than these two straight up new Cybertronians. So it has this fun dynamic where he's like, they take him seriously, but the other Transformers don't take Bumblebee seriously. Whereas it didn't really work that way in RID 2015, because it was just like, oh, he's training a bunch of like really young Cybertronians who also don't take him seriously, even though they have all these stories about the great accomplishment. I don't know. It's a more natural, nuanced dynamic, I feel like, in EarthSpark than it was in RID 2015, but kind of taking that same idea of like Bumblebee in a leader role, but not quite like the leader, just a leader, which I think works really well. I like both the new Cybertronians, Twitch and I can't remember his name either. I can't remember the bigger one of the kids and the bigger one of the Twitch and Thrash, right? I like both of them. They again, they're kind of playing this kid role where they're honestly less responsible than the human kids, which I think is a fun dynamic of like, you know, them kind of pairing off with each other, because like the human kids are like, they're kids, but they weren't literally born yesterday like the Cybertronians were. There's a lot of fun sort of like references and stuff in the show. We were seeing stuff early on about like this potentially having some new animation in the G1 style, so people were speculating that it might like literally be another entry into G1 canon, and it's not, thankfully, because that would be a mess with how messy G1 continuity is. But it's basically like they had their war in the 80s and the father is like telling them a story, because like Transformers are like an out-known phenomenon in Earth in the present day. So their father is like telling them all these things about like the Transformers war, and it's sort of like non-diegetically like visually represented by this like, you know, Sunbow 1984 Transformers style, where he's like telling them how the war played out in this sort of like idealized, kind of fictionalized way. So it's just kind of a nod to the style of the G1 cartoon. It's not literally saying that that was the, you know, the way there was. It's sort of like in Transformers Animated, how they use the footage of the, you know, from the original Transformers cartoon as this like war footage that Optimus Prime is watching in the first episode. Whereas like, obviously it's not implying that that Animated takes place in the far future of the G1 continuity, because, you know, Optimus Prime is here as a young Transformer who has never seen war before, so he's not the like future version of our Optimus Prime from G1. It's kind of like that, in that same vein of like, this is sort of similar to what happened in the original cartoon, but it is a different continuity entirely. And I think that works well. It's able to kind of establish things about the past, but is you know, it's leaving room for them to tell those stories later in like flashbacks and stuff like that, but do a different story other than just the Decepticon Autobot war again. Another reference that I really like, I don't even know if you can call it a reference, but something that just makes it very clear to me that like the people making this show care a lot about Transformers. One of the first characters that we see in this show, we see two Decepticons. They're like the first characters we see on screen is Swindle and Hardtop. Hardtop, like the toy-only character from Transformers Cybertron, Hardtop, and he's designed to look like his Transformers Cybertron toy, where he's got the pink and the green color scheme. He turns into the Dune Buggy. They designed an actual character for this show based off of not just like Armada, you know, or like not just a Unicron trilogy character like Hotshot or Red Alert or one of the ones who was actually in the show, but Hardtop, who is just a toy in the Cybertron toy line. Like, as far as I can remember, I don't think Hardtop ever actually showed up in the show, and if he did, it was just like a background cameo at best. But yeah, they have Hardtop, and he's brothers with Swindle, which is another fun reference because, again, going back to the Cybertron toy line, the Hardtop toy was repainted into Swindle. And Swindle doesn't look like the Cybertron Swindle toy. He looks more like a traditional G1 toy. But I think that's a really neat, you know, reference there to have them as brothers because of how they shared that mold in Transformers Cybertron. So that was a really cool thing. As soon as that happened, I immediately like sprung onto eBay and found the like like the best deal for Cybertron hardtop that I could, because I don't have that mold, and I just like bought it up because I'm like, this guy's, I was kind of wanting this mold before, and this guy's about to get a lot more expensive now that this show is coming out. But yeah, he doesn't play a huge role in the show. Like he ends up, he's only really in the first couple episodes, but still a really neat reference nonetheless, because like his role in the show is really like the villain of the show is Mandroid Dr. Meridian, who like is giving himself Cybertronian parts or whatever, so he steals Hardtop's arm. So later in the season, he uses Hardtop's arm and his gun, and he shoots it, and the gun actually looks kind of like the Transformers Cybertron toy gun, with like the thing sticking out to the side for where you put the Cyber Planet key in, which is like, they designed the gun to even look like that. I don't know, I'm geeking out a lot about Hardtop's inclusion in the show, but like, I was just baffled when they're like, Hardtop? And then like later on in the show, it's revealed that the thing that actually brought the new Cybertronians to life was the Ember Stone, and we start seeing these symbols on cave paintings on the wall, which is the little here, I've got it over here, the little Prime Master symbol for Quintus Prime, like the little symbol that they showed off, that they debuted in the Prime Wars trilogy, like this little symbol. And at first I'm just like, oh, maybe they're just picking a symbol from Transformers lore, but I'm like, are they doing Quintus Prime? Quintus is like one of the 13 primes who have like no story stuff, just because he was just kind of a character in the Covenant of Primus who like created the Quintessons. So it makes sense that they're using him here, because he's like, he's the one who like creates life on other planets, which is how the Quintessons were made in the Covenant of Primus, from the Aligned Continuity book. And it's really exciting because maybe we'll get to see him, and maybe we'll get a Quintus Prime toy in the EarthSpark toy line. And I don't know, that would be pretty cool. But other than little bludgeon guy, because he doesn't count as an actual Quintus Prime toy. But yeah, so Quintus Prime is going to be a big part of this narrative, and he's voiced by Clancy Brown, so he's going to be a more significant part of the actual story, because like you're not going to hire Clancy Brown to just do like one line for the show, right? So that would be pretty cool if Quintus Prime was a more established character. And then at the end of the show, we got the narrative ends with them going back to the cave, and they actually birth 3 new Terran Transformers, and they're pretty cool. One of them's name is fucking Hashtag, which is pretty stupid, but whatever. But importantly, one of the characters, Nightshade, is our first non-binary Transformer in like any media. Maybe there was something in comics, but I don't think so, but definitely first TV show non-binary Transformer. There were a few bots that in their toy bios are listed as they them, but not in the show. They weren't like Kick Me. Like Kick Me's toy in the bio is they them, but then in the show Kick Me is she her. But no, they're doing a they them Transformer, and I've seen a lot of people online talk about, oh, this is so cringe, and I'm like, do you think it's cringe because the moment was awkward, or do you think it's cringe because you don't really accept they them pronouns? Really look hard at yourself about that one, because like, yeah, I think the moment in the show was a little bit awkward, but it was kind of realistically awkward in that, like, that's sort of how interactions go when you're correcting someone's gender in real life. So it doesn't have to be a big deal. It wasn't like, oh, Optimus Prime is really having a hard time understanding this they-them thing. It was just like, oh, he wasn't really sure what to call them. And then, one of the kids is like, their pronouns are they-them. And that was it. And it's like, we don't have to make a big deal out of it, right? It's just like, cool. And it like, I feel like in terms of Transformers, since like, their gender is more made up than even our gender is, and our gender is pretty made up too. So it's like, I think it makes total sense to have some they-them Transformers, someone who's not going to identify as she, her, or he, him. Like, it just makes sense. So we haven't really seen a ton of those characters yet, just because they only showed up in the last episode. We haven't even seen, they haven't even scanned vehicle modes yet. So, we don't really know what they turn into. And that's another thing, is that this is a CG show that has Cybertronian like CG models for the characters before they scan their vehicles, which granted is only, you know, the 5 of them, Twitch, Thrash, and then the new guys. But when I was watching the show, the one thing I was struck by, because like the aesthetic is honestly fairly similar to Transformers Prime in terms of like the you know, in terms of like the CG, like it's not like the Cyberverse CG. It feels closer to Transformers Prime in terms of like the complexity of the designs and everything like that, except they do have noses, unlike Transformers Prime. But the one thing I was struck by is just like how many background character models there were, like 3D models for like human characters that don't have any lines of dialogue. Not so much Cybertronians. Like I feel like most of the actual Transformers that show up, like, you know, have enough to be worth their 3D models, although some of them only show up for like single episodes. So, but like comparing it to Prime, like if you ever looked at like the human characters to in the background of Prime, they were very like generic soldiers that all look exactly the same. Or like obviously, you know, we got the Viacons. This is how we give a Decepticon an army. It's like they're all the same, right? So it's just sort of feeling like, okay, you know, it's fine, but we can see where the budget is being stretched thin in Transformers Prime. Whereas this, I'm like, it's got a lot of stuff going on in the background that like isn't important, right? So it's just like it feels like it's got a good amount of budget, or maybe it's just like it's a lot cheaper to make full 3D models of characters than it used to be. I don't know, but like it definitely doesn't feel like, oh, behind every corner is just like a blank wall with no texture on it, or or like a copy and pasted, you know, mountain from the Midwest or something like that, kind of how like Prime did. So I appreciated that. It definitely seemed like there was budget put into this show, there was care put into this show, and it just feels like every aspect of it is, again, just like taken seriously. Not taken seriously like, oh, the War for Cybertron trilogy where everything has to be hard and gritty, but just taken seriously and like, it's a kid show, yes, it's fun and goofy, but also we know that kids like good narratives with good quality. And accepting that, and like those are the kind of kids shows that people really like, is the ones that take themselves seriously, are allowed to be fun and goofy, but still have, you know, stuff for you to bite into, not just as adults, but even kids. Kids like good narratives. I feel like I did when I was a kid. So, you know, it's like the reason everyone likes Teen Titans. You know, it's just like, again, Derek J. Wyatt, right? It's made Transformers Animated too. Transformers Animated, great example. It's fun, it's goofy, it gets real. It does get real. And this show, it doesn't have that many super real moments, but all the characters feel very believable, which I think is really, really nice. But yeah, that's, you know, there's, of course, things to get into in like every single episode, but that's kind of just the overview of it. I really like the show. I'm excited about where it's going. I don't know if this was like season 1 that's only 9 episodes, or if they're just releasing the first half of season 1 now and then later they're going to do the second, because I thought I had read earlier that the seasons were going to be like 24 episodes, not 9 episodes, but I don't know. If it was season 1, it was a good season. I wish it were longer. And if this was only 1 season, I hope it gets more than like the typical Transformers 3 seasons, because it wouldn't be enough with just like the, you know, like few less than 30 episodes. Like I think that it needs more than that. But so far, so good. I'm really enjoying it, and I watched through the whole thing, and I just like got out of the experience feeling just like so happy that we finally have gotten another Transformers show that is like, it's actually a good show in and of itself, not just like oh, this is things for me to appreciate as a Transformers fan. Like, no, I can recommend this to my friends and get them into Transformers, which has not been true for a lot of Transformers shows, even if there are things in it that I like. I'm like, yeah, I think a lot of people would like Prime. You know, it's got some spots, it's got some like sort of conveniences and stuff in the plot, and some things that you kind of have to just suspend your disbelief about, but it's really good. I love Prime. I still feel like it's my favorite Transformers show. Beast Wars, great show. It's a lot of fun, very campy, but you know, it's always like, convincing people nowadays to just like suck it up and deal with the dated CG is, you know, I think the CG is better than some stuff that we got more recently, at least in terms of like the facial expression and stuff like that. But it definitely is like things clip. It's got no textures sometimes, so it's a little rough, but I still love Beast Wars. And animated, I think, is for anyone who likes cartoons, like, great show to recommend to people. But that's kind of it. Like every other Transformers show up until now, I've always felt like I can't really recommend this to my non-Transformers friends without like a huge caveat, whereas those three shows in particular, I think, can really be enjoyed by anyone who's into that kind of genre. And EarthSpark, I think, is falling into that. This might be making my top 4 Transformers shows, at least so far. How it's going, I'll have to wait till it's actually all out. But yeah, no, I really like the show. If you got Paramount Plus, go watch it. Or, you know, if there's some other way, I don't know the other ways to watch it. If it's airing on Nick, watch it there. It's a really fun Transformers show, and I think it's definitely worth your attention. But yeah, this is just a fun little bonus video. I usually put out stuff, usually reviews every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. But yeah, that's my little quickie review, or not that quick review, of Transformers EarthSpark. It's good. It's a good show.